But I don't want to take all the credit for this, because if you look at this book, they have two authors on here. Eric Baxter is my co-author, longtime research associate. He is a brilliant man. In fact, when Eric was a teenager, I guess he was maybe 13, maybe even not a teenager, maybe 12. I was at the University of New Orleans in the chemistry department, and his mother was working as a secretary in the biology department. And we were talking one day, and she said, "My son wrote something up. I would appreciate it if you'd have a look at it and give me your opinion." It's okay. So she brought it to me. It was about 3 pages or so long. And I read through it, and I said, "Do you know what he did here?" I said, "This is Einstein's theory of relativity." I said, "How old is he?" I think around 12 years old. I said, "Where in the world did he learn all the mathematics and the physics to develop?" I said, "Did he do this by himself?" She said, "Yes, he always does this kind of stuff." Now, that's the kind of person Eric is. So I've got to give him a lot of credit, because without Eric's work on this aquanucleosynthesis that Carl just mentioned, that wouldn't have been done. It had to be done on a computer. It's all in there, and I want to acknowledge Eric as well for that, because he is a very dear and vital contributor to my success. And so I'm not going to take all the accolades, for sure. What I want to speak to you today is regarding this book. As you can see and on the screen, God Created the Earth. And we are looking at several things in this book. I'm not going to go through the whole book. I'm going to try to focus on the essential parts, which are concerning the Canopy model, which was put in at the end because I had written in a first edition, which was a paperback edition, before I even talked to Carl about the Canopy idea, before he asked me if I would consider that. And then we worked on that, and then, of course, had to write a second edition, hardbound, thanks to a couple of people here in the audience for their financial support to get this thing published, and Carl's faithful supporters. Anyway, so we have the Canopy in this model, in this hard version. I don't have any more of the paperback models anyway, so I got quite a few of these myself at home. If you know people who want them, let me know. We will get them a copy. So what I'm going to do is kind of give you an overview of what this book says, and then take it from there, focusing on those aspects that are pertinent to the Canopy. Okay? So 2 important topics that are addressed, well, 3 important topics actually. The major topics in the book were the origin of chemical elements using a biblical basis. God first created water. If you read Genesis 1, the first 3 verses, the very first thing that's obvious is material is present. It's water. Because it said the Spirit of God hovered, and that word in the Hebrew can mean a lot more than just hanging around, you know, really doing some work, agitating that water. He's agitating that water into a very high energy ball called a plasma. That's what he's doing. In fact, some of the best Hebrew scholars told me that's an exact translation of what the Hebrew was saying. God was converting that water into a plasma. Now, that was everything that the universe was going to come from. I'm only isolating a portion of that applies to the earth. I'm not considering the whole universe, okay? So that part of the water that God activated to become the earth is the thing that we're considering here, okay? So the first part is considering oxygen and hydrogen. As well, everybody knows this much chemistry. Water is what? H2O, right? Okay, we know that. All right. 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen. Well, most people stop there and they don't know anything else. They might know CO2 now because there's so much about global warming going on, you know, it's all around us with all the lies and so on. Anyway, that's another rabbit to chase, but we're not doing that today. I also did a study on that several years ago
on the whole global warming phenomenon and showed that it is not even happening. And other credible scientists are doing that, but the government says the only science they recognize are the ones that they support. Interesting, right? Okay, we don't want to go down that rabbit trail. Let's move on. Two elements, hydrogen and oxygen, are going to be the source of all the chemical elements in the periodic table. Okay? Now, the intense energy of the plasma is going to be sufficient to allow fusion reactions, nuclear fusion reactions, to take place. And we modeled those reactions and showed that all of the processes are completed within 2.5 days. Now, what happens on day 3 in Genesis? You remember? God creates plants, right? So we have to have a cooled off earth. Everything has to be in place for those plants to be there. So everything has to happen quite quickly. Evolution would say, from the time of the Big Bang, pick any number you want, 13 billion years ago is kind of the current figure right now. Used to be 16. Some people say 12. It doesn't make any difference. They're all wrong. But the point is this. Whatever you pick, they said within some roughly 600,000 years after that initial event, all the chemical elements were being produced. Well, that's a big difference between 600,000 years and 2.5 days, right? So that's quite obvious. Okay, so let's move on. The production takes place in a myriad of collision processes. We consider only two-body processes. Those are the ones that you can handle. Multi-body processes require a lot of sophistication to deal with, and the physics of that and the reliability of that in multi-body processes is not always on the up and up. So, but two-body collisions between, say, two different chemical components are things that are adequate to get the job done. Let's put it that way, okay? So none of this has been simulated in the laboratory directly, except, I'm going to tell you very shortly, there has been some work done in Russia and Ukraine. And I mentioned that in the book. A good friend of mine, Dr. Joel Selman, was a professor at LSU in Louisiana. I knew him for all his days over there. He's now in Colorado where I am. He's retired. He lives a little farther away than I am. He published this paper in 1973, as you can see, Journal of Chemical Education, which deals with the evolution model of the elements. And I don't know, that's a busy chart, and I know you don't want to read that, so I'm going to just tell you basically what it says is you start with the energy process of evolution, you produce hydrogen and helium, and all these other things come by different mechanisms into being till all the chemical elements are produced, okay? That's enough on that thing right there. So I use 18 billion years because at the time I wrote this, that's the number they were hanging on. So 18 billion years. I said 600, they say 700,000. Anyway, the point is that a vastly different model, you see, for this process, vastly different. All the elements that are being produced include those elements that are unstable. Those elements that are unstable are called radioactive. They decay. In fact, if you do any medical testing, a lot of times you'll inject a dye with a radioactive component in there to be able to follow it. You know, whatever they're trying to follow, a scan or something like that. So they use nuclear medicine is a big thing in this day and age, as you well know. Okay. So radioactivity has its applications and its benefits. It also has detriment too, because it's the stuff that you make nuclear bombs out of, like Werner von Braun knew very well, and so on. You know. Anyway, the point is, in the Ukraine, at Proton 21 Electrodynamics Laboratory, and I've got the reference right here, and it's back there in 2007. Okay, the work that was being done under the direction of Dr. Adamenko was to use a small sample of any element or even a piece of plastic, solid material, zap it with a high energy laser source, and from that high energy laser source, observe in a very sensitive scan mechanism all the products that obtained. So in a very small micro scale, with that process going on, every chemical element in the periodic table, including some that are beyond the periodic table, were also identified.